Today's video is brought to you by Brilliant.org, the learning platform that sparks curiosity and boosts productivity. Do you want to dive deeper into the concepts that fascinate you? Want to learn something new every day, even if you've got only a few minutes to spare? Well, Brilliant can help you do just that. It's an interactive platform that teaches maths and computer science in an engaging and entertaining way. Unlike traditional online courses, Brilliant focuses on interactive lessons that keep you engaged and motivated. But whether you're a beginner or a pro, Brilliant has thousands of lessons on foundational and advanced maths, AI, data science, neural networks, and more. It's not just about learning, it's about the outcomes that learning can bring. By mastering the skills taught on Brilliant, you can unlock your true potential and reach your goals in ways that you never thought possible. Whether you're looking to jumpstart a career in tech, build the next big thing, or just explore new concepts, Brilliant can help you out. Brilliant's content is so absurdly interesting that it's just hard not to fall in love with the platform. From mind-bending puzzles to stunning visualizations, Brilliant offers content that helps boost your analytical, creative, problem-solving skills, letting you experiment with real-world scenarios. Once you've got a taste for it, you'll absolutely be hooked. For example, maybe you want to get into programming. They've got a course on Python programming. It's got interactive exercises, coding challenges, real-world examples. Perfect way to learn. So go to brilliant.org/brainfood to start your free 30-day trial today. The first 200 of you will also get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. So what are you waiting for? Start learning with Brilliant today. Link below. And now today's video. On December the 8th, 1941, the day after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States declared war on the Empire of Japan. 3 days later, on December the 11th, Japan's ally Nazi Germany declared war on the US. This was to prove a major strategic blunder for the Nazis, for not only was the United States the greatest industrial power in the world, but its geographic isolation from both Germany and Japan made it nearly invulnerable to enemy attack. While the U-boats of the German Kriegsmarine scored impressive victories against Allied shipping early in the war, by 1943, the sheer volume of merchant vessels being churned out by American shipyards plus advancements in anti-submarine technology and tactics had all but secured Allied supremacy over the Atlantic. After that, the only way America could be attacked was from the air, something no existent German aircraft was capable of. This, however, didn't stop the Nazis from trying, and throughout the war, German engineers came up with a variety of ambitious designs for a so-called America bomber, an aircraft capable of flying 6,000 kilometers from Germany to New York City and taking the fight to the enemy. While most of these designs consisted of giant, multi-engined bombers, one proposal stood out among the rest. Impressively prophetic, this design was so fantastically advanced that a vehicle of its type would not be successfully flown for another 4 decades. This is a story of the Silbervogel, the Nazi space shuttle that never was. Since the earliest days of science fiction, most writers assumed that future spacecraft would be similar to sailing ships or other aircraft, largely reusable vehicles that could fly to and from space multiple times before needing to be repaired or overhauled. Though theoretically this approach permits enormous cost savings over single-use spacecraft, in practice the added complexity of designing a reusable spaceplane nearly always outweighs these savings. Consequently, over the past 60 years, most astronauts have traveled into space aboard simple single-use ballistic capsules. However, this has not deterred designers from trying to crack the problem of reusable spacecraft, and among the first attack of this challenge was a German engineer named Eugene Sanger. Born in 1905 in the town of Presnitz in what is now the Czech Republic, Sanger initially pursued studies in civil engineering at the Technical Universities of Graz and Vienna in Austria. However, during his studies, Sanger read the influential book By Rockets to Planetary Space by pioneering rocketry theorist Hermann Oberth, and like many young engineers of his day, was inspired to change his field of study to aeronautics. Around this time, he also joined the Society for Space Travel, which counted among its members Oberth and a young Werner von Braun, future father of the V-2 ballistic missile and the Saturn V moon rocket. Befitting his newfound passion, Sanger attempted to write his thesis on the subject of rocket flight, but this was rejected by the university as too fanciful. He finally graduated in 1929 after submitting a more mundane thesis on the statics of wing trusses. In 1936, Sanger published his rejected thesis as a book titled Rocket Flight Engineering, in which he laid out a unique concept for achieving high-speed, long-distance flight using a rocket-powered spaceplane. Rather than entering orbit, Sanger's proposed spaceplane would climb up to just above the atmosphere and descend on a ballistic trajectory. The flat fuselage of the craft would be specially designed to generate lift, causing it to skip off the atmosphere like a stone skipping across a pond. Due to atmospheric drag, each skip would be progressively shorter than the last, but if the velocity and the re-entry angle were properly calculated, such a craft could theoretically travel halfway around the world in mere minutes. Today, this type of flight profile is referred to as a non-ballistic atmospheric entry, or boost glide. These ideas caught the attention of the Reich Air Ministry, who saw Sanger's rocket glider as a potential means of attacking the continental United States from Germany. In 1936, the ministry established a laboratory near Braunschweig in Lower Saxon, where Sanger could develop the 100-ton thrust rocket engine needed to make his futuristic spacecraft possible. Here, he worked alongside a team of technicians and mathematician Irene Brett, who Singer would later marry in 1951. Together, Sanger and Brett worked out many of the theoretical problems with boost glide flight, including the ideal shape for the spacecraft's lifting body fuselage and the massive frictional and compression heating the vehicle would encounter as it re-entered the atmosphere. They also pioneered one of the key developments in rocket engine design: regenerative cooling. The burning propellants in a rocket engine produce extremely high temperatures which easily can melt ordinary aerospace materials like aluminium. While combustion chambers and nozzles can be built of more heat-resistant materials like steel, these add weight to the engine's structure, reducing its performance. Sanger and Brett's solution was to circulate the fuel through a double-walled chamber and nozzle wall prior to injecting it into the engine. This simultaneously wicked away combustion heat and pre-pressurized the fuel, allowing the engine to be made far lighter and far more efficient. This basic design is used in nearly all liquid-fueled rocket engines to this day. On December 3, 1941, Sanger presented his final proposal to the Air Ministry. Dubbed Silbervogel or Silver Bird, Sanger's spaceplane looked like something straight out of science fiction. 28 meters long and weighing 10 tons, the craft featured a wide, streamlined hull with a flat bottom for skipping over the atmosphere, as well as stubby wings and a small twin tail. The majority of the internal volume was devoted to tanks of kerosene and liquid oxygen propellant to feed the single rocket engine, leaving only minimal space for the pilot and weapons payload. The craft was to be launched horizontally on a 3-kilometer track using a rocket sled, whose cluster of 6 liquid-fueled engines would accelerate it to nearly 2,000 kilometers per hour in only 10 seconds. Once airborne, Silbervogel would fire its own engine for 168 seconds, reaching a speed of 21,800 kilometers per hour, nearly 18 times the speed of sound, and an altitude of 145 kilometers, well above where most consider space to have begun. The aircraft would then enter the boost glide phase, skipping its way across the Atlantic Ocean towards the United States. Once over New York or another target city, the pilot would open the bomb bay doors and release his 4,000-kilogram payload, his extreme speed and altitude making him invulnerable to enemy aircraft. As Nazi Germany never came close to developing an atomic bomb, for maximum destructive effect, this payload would likely have been a dirty bomb, composed of radioactive material wrapped around a conventional explosive core. And for more on this, please do check out our video on how close did the Nazis actually come to building an atomic bomb. As there was no way for Silbervogel to turn around and head back to Germany, Sanger proposed that it continued gliding over the North American continent to the Pacific Ocean, where it would land on an island occupied by Germany's ally Japan, a total journey of up to 24,000 kilometers. Though decades ahead of its time, Sanger's technically dense 900-page proposal failed to impress the Air Ministry, who filed it away and decided to focus on simpler, more conventional technology for the American bomber. The Braunschweig team were disbanded and Sanger was reassigned to the German Gliding Research Institute in Darmstadt. There, he carried out research on ramjet engines and worked on the design of the Skoda Kauber P-14 ramjet interceptor, one of many hastily conceived emergency fighters developed in the final days of the war in a desperate attempt to stem the tide of Allied bombers. In 1944, Sanger and Brett submitted an edited version of the 1941 Silbervogel proposal to the Air Ministry under the title A Rocket Drive for Long-Range Bombers, but once again it was rejected. In the end, 4 major designs were submitted to the American bomber program, all conventional multi-engine bombers: the Messerschmitt Me-264, the Focke-Wulf TA-400, the Junkers Ju-390, and the Heinkel HE-277. Of these, only the Messerschmitt and the Junkers entries were actually built, with the Junkers Ju-390 ultimately being selected for production. However, only 2 prototypes were ever completed, and none entered service before the end of the war. Several other schemes were proposed to attack America from Germany, including the unusual Huckepack or piggyback concept. This involved mounting a modified Dornier Do-217 light bomber on the back of a Heinkel HE-117 heavy bomber, which would carry its passenger as far as possible before releasing it and returning to Germany. The light bomber would then fly the rest of the way to the target, then ditch in the ocean, where a U-boat would be waiting to rescue the crew. While the plan was seriously considered, a lack of fuel and the loss of the Luftwaffe airbase at Bordeaux prevented a full-scale test flight. Furthermore, the Kriegsmarine refused to spare any U-boats, effectively killing the project. Meanwhile, Werner von Braun and his team of rocket engineers at Peenemünde in northern Germany proposed a supersized version of their infamous V-2 ballistic missile that would be capable of reaching North America. Dubbed the A-10 or America Rocket, the rocket would have measured 14 meters tall, weighed over 14 tons, and been able to cover a distance of 5,000 kilometers in around 35 minutes. As guidance systems at the time were not sophisticated enough to provide the desired accuracy at such ranges, the craft was designed to be manned, with the unfortunate pilot using radio beacons mounted aboard U-boats to guide the 1-ton warhead on its final suicidal descent. In 1943, Otto Laferenz, director of the Deutsche Arbeitsfront labor organization, also submitted a proposal for launching ordinary V-2s from U-boats off of the American coast. Codenamed Project Schwimmweste or Project Life Jacket, Laferenz's proposal involved the construction of a 500-ton watertight canister to be towed behind a U-boat, which would contain one rocket and tanks for its alcohol and liquid oxygen propellants. When close to the target, the U-boat crew would flood compartments in the rear of the canister to make it float upright, then fuel and launch the rocket. The canister would then be scuttled and the U-boat would return to base. Though one prototype launch canister was completed, the concept, like the A-10 America Rocket and Eugen Sanger's Silbervogel, was never tested before the war came to an end. Nonetheless, these concepts proved prophetic, presaging the intercontinental ballistic missiles and submarine-launched ballistic missiles of today. But for all the advanced concepts it incorporated, Silbervogel would most likely never have worked as designed. Post-war analysis revealed that Sanger and Brett severely underestimated the heat load their craft would encounter on re-entry, meaning that Silbervogel and its unfortunate test pilot would likely have burned up on the first atmospheric skip. The problem could theoretically have been solved by thickening the heat shield, but this would have reduced the useful bomb payload to practically nothing, rendering the aircraft useless as a weapon. Nonetheless, its design would prove hugely influential on the field of spacecraft design. After the war, Eugen Sanger and Irene Brett moved to France, where in 1949 they founded the Fédération Aéronautique. In 1954, they returned to Germany, where Sanger directed jet engine research in Stuttgart and consulted for Junkers aircraft before dying in 1964 at the age of 59. It was while living in France that the Sangers survived a botched kidnapping attempt by Soviet agents. After occupying the Peenemünde research facility, Red Army troops discovered a copy of Sanger and Brett's Silbervogel proposal. The idea intrigued Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, who dispatched his son Vasily and engineer Grigory Tokaty to convince the Sangers to come to the Soviet Union. However, the two would-be agents were unsuccessful, as were NKVD agents sent to take the couple by force. Despite lacking Sanger's expertise, in 1946 the Soviets set up a design bureau under the direction of mathematician Mstislav Keldysh to develop their own spaceplane. Realizing that the sheer volume of propellant needed to feed a liquid rocket engine would have given Silbervogel a negligible useful bomb load, Keldysh instead fitted his design with more efficient ramjets, creating a vehicle capable of carrying a practical nuclear weapon over a range of 12,000 kilometers. However, Keldysh estimated that the design would not be ready until the late 1950s, by which point it would likely be rendered obsolete by simpler intercontinental ballistic missiles. As a result, the Keldysh bomber was quietly shelved. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Sanger's ideas were gaining traction thanks to one Major General Walter Dornberger, the military head of the V-2 ballistic missile program. After the war, Dornberger, along with many German rocket scientists, were brought to the United States as part of Operation Paperclip. After developing ballistic missiles for the United States Air Force, Dornberger worked in the private aerospace sector, becoming vice president of Bell Aircraft and consulting for North American Aircraft and Boeing. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Dornberger attempted to sell the United States military on the concept of a boost glide spaceplane like Sanger's Silbervogel, which he dubbed the antipodal bomber. Following the launch of Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite, on October 4th, 1957, the Air Force finally approved Dornberger's concept under the designation X-20 Dinosaur, short for Dynamic Soarer. Other names included the Rocket Bomber or Robo, Bomber Missile or BOMI, Brass Bell, and Hypersonic Strategic Weapon System. Measuring 11 meters long with 6 meters wingspan, the dart-shaped, flat-bottomed Dinosaur was designed to be launched into space atop a modified Titan II ballistic missile. While boost glide missions were possible, the craft was also capable of reaching orbit like the later Space Shuttle. Once in orbit, the single pilot could carry out a variety of missions, such as orbital bombardment of enemy targets, orbital reconnaissance with cameras and other sensors stored in a small equipment bay, or rendezvousing with and repairing satellites in orbit. Uniquely among spacecraft of the era, the Dinosaur's aerodynamic lifting body shape would have allowed it to very efficiently change its orbital inclination by briefly dipping into the atmosphere. To protect the craft against the heat of re-entry, it was built of high-temperature nickel superalloys, while its stubby wings and wire brush skids would have allowed it to glide to a runway landing like a regular aircraft. In April 1960, 7 astronauts were secretly selected for the dinosaur program, including Neil Armstrong. However, the project soon began running into problems, the biggest being what the X-20 was even for. As rocket and guidance technology continued to improve, it quickly became clear that nuclear bombardment could be more easily and cheaply carried out using ballistic missiles and orbital reconnaissance using unmanned spy satellites than with a complex manned spaceplane. This, combined with confusion over what booster to use, Department of Defense budget cuts, and a government decree placing all manned spaceflight under the purview of NASA, led to the project being cancelled in 1963. It was not until April 12, 1981 that the first successful winged spacecraft, the Space Shuttle Columbia, was launched into orbit, finally making Eugen Sanger's prophetic vision a reality. But it was only a partial realization, for due to a long list of design compromises, the Space Shuttle was never able to achieve the massive cost savings promised by reusable spacecraft. Thus, following the shuttle's retirement in 2011, the world returned to using reliable, relatively inexpensive ballistic missile capsules to get into space. But as the ongoing development of new space planes like the Boeing X-37 and the SNC Dream Chaser demonstrate, the dream of reliable, reusable winged spaceflight is still alive and well, and future astronauts may yet glide rather than plummet back to Earth.